process of being made operational and formalized. It works very closely with a number of critical institutions besides the public broadcaster who does the production. We're going to be working very closely with the information regulator. The information regulator, we believe, is critical to making this work. We have a very strong information regulator in South Africa, which has not only data protection requirements in the law, but also access to information, which is obviously a very critical counterpoint to that as well, and is being looked at. And I think, Mukalani, let me not tread on your turf there, but we are very much hoping that with very minor adjustments to the law, Priya has also been working on this, it could also be an access to data law. But the actual sharing of the data, the sort of technical aspects of what is required there, obviously there's a lot of very specific technical things that have to happen. We've got people from the universities, University of Pretoria, working specifically on this, but there'll be a wider spread of people, and working together with other groups that are working on this across the continent. But then we'd also have the Innovation Fund in the Science and Technology department that could support. It's not going to pay for the public broadcaster, but it could be a nice revenue stream for this incredibly, this virtuous production of data. And so all these different elements would be absolutely critical to a governance framework that was recognized through public value, through the public purse, and ultimately allow for local public interest, AI system, LLM modeling, and AI systems, supporting these AI systems. So that's what the discussion is. Obviously, there are a number of legal components to this, but we also wanted to share it because I think for maybe, certainly politicians, it's quite a hard sell. Everybody's in kind of austerity and these kinds of things. But to just, this is really such a gift. And if we can get it to work, it will create so much more greater public value and really address this critical problem, which because Maravati was here, would say the biggest problem, there's a lot of talk about computational power, and of course that's true, but for local language modeling, there are three big problems, data, as people say. So this is really what we are hoping that will come to fruition in South Africa in the very near term. And then could also, I know other people are going to speak about other public broadcasters, often commercial, not public broadcasters, commercial broadcasters on the continent, who are also being resistant, and we might find ways of them being more receptive to some of these issues. So on that note, I think I'm going to move to Mukalani Dimba from the information regulator, who's going to speak a little bit about that. And if Dr. Medesnene from the Tech Envoy's Office from ODET, Office for Digital Enhanced Technologies, arrives, then he'll speak after you. Thank you so much. Wherever you'd like.
That's fine. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me properly? Thank you. Thank you so much, Alison, for that introduction. Actually, you've covered some of what I wanted to cover today. I am with the Information Regulator of South Africa. We are established in terms of our data protection legislation, but we also have a mandate on access to information. So we also regulate access to information issues in the country. So we are a data protection authority as well as an information commission for South Africa. Now, we are not an AI oversight authority, not by any chance, but simply because issues around AI really revolve around accessing data. Now, data is the currency of the new digital economy. We then become involved in all the discourse and the discussion and the dialogues around AI governance. From our perspective, AI governance requires that there is protection of personal information, but there's also accessing of critical databases that are needed to develop AI. So this is our angle as the information regulator. What we want to be able to do as the information regulator to support the work that has been initiated by the various partners is to see to it that the legislation that we have is fit for purpose. Unfortunately, like all freedom of information laws or access to information laws, the South African Promotion of Access to Information Act is no longer fit for purpose. in an era of AI. A lot of our laws were designed for paper-based information. So one of the moves that we're going to be initiating with our parliament is to move for an amendment of the legislation so that we reimagine what we mean about accessing information. A lot of our laws talk about the state being proactive in making information available, and we have a specific idea of what we mean by making information automatically available. We talk about things such as budgets, things such as the services being provided by those public institutions. But that's a very dated idea of what we mean about making information proactively available. We need to start looking at things such as algorithmic transparency. Is this something that we should be saying to the partners they need to be proactive about? We need to be able to come to a point where we are quite clear around the rules of the game for the development and deployment of AI systems. This space is largely unregulated. I mean, I think it's been discussed here quite often, this point that AI development and deployment is unregulated. So there is a tendency by a number of governments to then look at the existing mechanisms to see whether those can be used as a form of regulation. So in our case, there's been a tendency throughout the world, actually, to look at data protection authorities as possible mechanisms for regulation of AI. But that is limited because by its nature, the work that we do only focuses on personal information processing. So once an AI system does not involve the processing of personal information, it means, therefore, the mechanism that you have, such as the Data Protection Authority, is quite limited in what we can do. I think ours, in relation to the project that Dr. Gilwald mentioned earlier, we are quite keen to ensure that the data protection legislation is not used to frustrate innovation through arguments around privacy and secrecy. But we want to support the partners in carrying out this balancing act between protecting personal information, but also enabling the free flow of data that is so critical for AI innovation. So that is our take, Dr. Gilwald. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think there's so many things people want to unpack about the mechanics of the regulations and the licenses in order for this data to flow. So hopefully we can come back to some of that. And we don't have Dr. Snene, so I'm actually going to go across to Priya. Priya, while we're still on Africa, I'm wondering if you could just tell us some of the really exciting African context and frameworks we've got that include principles of access to data.
All right. I hope everyone can hear me. And thank you so much, Alison, and thank you for that introductory context. I suppose it's the dilemma in the South African case, but it's a wicked problem and a good dilemma to have. And I'm encouraged by how many people are thinking about it, and I think the level of attention that it received, even in a platform like the G20. As Alison mentioned, I wanted to turn the discussion, if we are thinking about national readiness within the South Africa case, it could be that other African countries are facing exactly the same issue, where they're sitting on this gold mine of broadcasting data, and they have the dilemma of the innovator who is looking to do some incredible training and seize this opportunity. And so the question is, if we had to look at the continental frameworks, what is it that we have that would give us a baseline of where we're at and what we could leverage? The first one is the African Union Continental Strategy, and I think the kind of opening statement in the Continental Strategy is understanding the constraints for AI, the very large ambitions we have for AI, but some of the constraints. So even while the benefits of AI would remain high for the continent, we still remain with this divide, with the AI divide, and it persists. And it points to three issues. The first being the lack of high quality and large data sets. The second being the compute. and the third being the talent capabilities that are critical for AI development and use. And I want to provoke here that perhaps we do have the data sets, but we don't have the access that we need. And I also want to provoke that perhaps the capabilities and the skills that we need will also be improved once we do have access to the data and our innovation could run more smoothly. So the strategy itself is looking to strengthen a number of things, including cooperation. It calls out that there should be cooperation between research institutes and private and public sector, and it encourages the development of capacities in various areas, including in this area around a large language model training. So one of its topmost priorities is ensuring the availability of high quality and diverse data sets to underpin AI development and ensure the availability of the infrastructure to be able to process such data. So I want to quickly look at what it says in the detail, because it says this is the large ambition, but it also recognizes that there's a need for ethical standards, to respect human rights in the way that we engage with the data, and to recognize people's dignity, respect diversity, inclusivity, and African culture and values. It speaks about safety and security by design, and it speaks about the risks, as the information regulator mentioned, in relation to privacy and personal data. Intellectual property risks is also raised in the continental strategy, and then the risk of subversion of indigenous knowledge and African cultural heritage. Now, that's not to say that what we're proposing here immediately is part of this risk framework, but what the continental strategy is advising is that one has to accomplish this by taking into account the ethics, the safety by design, and the privacy and data. So the governance framework that Dr. Gilwald mentioned is essential to drive us forward. Two other things that are encouraging is that we do have, since 2014, a convention on cybersecurity and personal data protection. So if there was another country that faced a similar dilemma and their information regulation was perhaps not as mature, they would also be able to rely on the principles of data protection there. That is about accountability for how we use the data, the minimality of processing, so we only take what it is that we need, the security safeguards, the responsibilities for data controllers, and for any data intermediary that engages with the data. So we do have those frameworks. There is the AU Data Policy Framework, which is a blueprint to establish data governance systems that harness data for innovation, private sector competitiveness, social and economic development, but is doing it through a national integrated data management system that is looking to unleash the value of data for all. So it's looking to address inequities in the way that data is accessed, and this would fall squarely into one of the ambitions for that. More recently, we have the initiative driven by the African Commission for Human and People's Rights that passed a resolution 620 on access to data. And again, it's a regional framework that takes a human rights lens to access to data, seeing it as an instrument for human rights, for the realization of human rights, access to data as a means of realizing human rights. So I think all of these regional frameworks, albeit a snapshot, they create this regional facility that we can leverage. In a way, it's an endorsement that at this point in time where we're at, that access to data is part of continental priorities, that in the way that we access data, of course, we must observe our human rights standards, but that we can reimagine the public, a broadcaster, in an AI for development context. We can be guided by these frameworks and those that are developed elsewhere to imagine the partnerships, coordination, ethical and safety issues, and to make sure that our legal and regulatory measures, as was mentioned by the information regulator, are also up to standard. Thank you.
Priya, thank you so much for that. And my apologies, and I hope you'll all stay with us because it sounds like something far more exciting is happening, like a drinks party or something next door to us. Please bear with us, we're not going to be long. Because we were meant to have our slides up with our little small speaker descriptions and bios, I haven't done justice to people, so it will be on our page that we are going to put this up on. But that was Priya Chetty. She's the Executive Director of Research ICT Africa. And I'm now going to keep us in Africa And I'm going to ask Tajuddin Gwadabe from Masakani Hub to talk to us a little bit about
Sure, thank you. So Masakani is a community of researchers that are interested in building NLP for African languages, and our work span over a lot of African countries. We have done dataset collection, model building for over 40 African languages on different aspects. I want to share some insights from what we have done in terms of working with broadcasters. So we know that most big tech use data from the web to scrape and build models. Now, when it comes to Africa and for a community organization that is interested in ensuring that we do our work ethically, when you look at the websites of a lot of African media organizations, you don't have any information on the license that is attached to the data. So you're not sure whether it's okay to use the data or not okay to use the data. The best way to do then is to actually contact them and ask for permission to use the data. Now, when you ask for permission, you might not get a reply. But when you do get a reply, it becomes a question of, so it means the data is valuable. So now we want compensation for that. Before you ask, they might not really know the value, but when you do ask, then it means that there is value to that. So in 2021, we had a project where we're looking at developing name entity recognition models for African languages. And we wanted to ensure that the data sets we're using are actually not translations from English, but actually data sets from, like the starting data is actually from languages, and then we thought of broadcasters. So now we look at Kenya, for example, not to mention the name of the organization. We found this broadcaster, they had good data in Luo, which is one of the languages spoken in Kenya. We checked the website, there is no information on the type of license, we weren't sure whether to use or not. We contacted them and they wanted us to pay for the data. That took us over a year to resolve and also agree on what to pay for that research to go forward. That's a case in Kenya. On the flip side, when you, at the same project, we contacted media organizations in Nigeria, and the ones we contacted were okay, as long as this is for research, we're willing for you to use the data. So we got the agreement, and then we were able to use the data. But then those were mostly text data sets, meaning that there is less issue of bias, like because there is no identifier, whether it's male or female, then you can actually use that to develop model. Now, the question becomes more interesting when you want to use voice data from broadcasting organizations. Then you have to think about how do you ensure balance between speakers, how do you ensure balance between ages, and that becomes a more complex question that you have to think about the technical part of how you collect the data, balancing between the process of actually taking the raw data into something useful, because the way the data is being produced, there are issues of personal identifiers, there are adverts and other things that you need to remove in the process. So what I think would be beneficial in this process of developing a governance framework includes also looking at those technical aspects of the data, especially from a voice perspective, what should be there and what should not be there. Another way of interacting with media houses, earlier today I was speaking to Michael from Robert Mali, and he mentioned that their approach was to be a mutual collaboration between their organization and the media house. So what they did is get the data to train the model, but in return, they now train the media house on how to use AI. Now that is kind of another mutual relationship that can happen. Now, I'm just going to go back to Nigeria because I'm from Nigeria. We do have these government broadcasting organizations, and they do have lots of data. And from what I have understood, each whether public, private, community, there is a regulation that says that all their data, all their programs must be recorded and stored for a period of certain number of months. For if there is anything that they need to go back, reference back to, or in court cases, meaning that the data is there sitting, a lot of it, and it's not being used. And apart from not being used, because they don't have the storage, so after the expiration of the mandatory period for government storage, they delete the data. Yes, because they don't have the storage and they need to continue storing the data. So it's really important to also look at these different avenues, how best to get the data, because they exist. And as usually mentioned, data is one of the key missing parts in developing AI for most African languages, and we cannot continue to rely on funders and donors to provide support for creating these data sets. We have to look inward, and I believe this is one important step that we can take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tejin. That's really critical technical insights there for us. And I think Gita Raju is also going to give us, is also going to give us some more sort of technical insights to that, particularly in the Indian context. Gita's from the Center for Responsible AI. And in your response, Gita, please do talk a little bit about your organization and the work you do. Thank you.
So briefly, I will talk about the center that we are working on. It's the Center for Responsible AI at IIT Madras. So we work on tech and policy research on responsible AI aspects of AI adoption in Global South generally. And I would like to highlight few initiatives that are relevant to datasets, multilingual, grounded datasets that cater to the diverse languages around India. So there is an initiative called AI for Bharat, which hosts different models, datasets, and other frameworks that will help people to adopt AI systems that are that can cater to all 22 official Indian languages in India, and those things are like publicly available datasets and platforms. So for example, we spoke a lot about how do we crowdsource data, how do we annotate data, right? So there is a platform called Shunya which will help the developers and the communities to annotate the crowdsourced data, and that is a platform that could act as an enabler for the developer community, be it startups and other things. From a different perspective, from the central government perspective in India, right? So we have a platform called AI Kosh as part of the India AI mission. So they host a lot of publicly available data sets that are AI ready. So how do we come up with a standard of, say, the standards of data sets which we can declare as AI ready, right? So for the traditional AI models, right? So you know how a statistical data should look like, how machine learning data, say a linear data set should look like. So what is it for the large language models? How are the anonymization made when it's publicly available, right? So those type of standards, the strategies for anonymizing the data that are publicly available, those things are taken care by the AI Coach platform before getting the data uploaded into the platform for public view. So these type of initiatives are happening in India to enable the researchers and the organizations who want to adopt AI for public good. And apart from this, I would like to highlight a couple of issues, or it could be a kind of sensitive aspects which all the developer community should focus on, right? So when we say AI ready data for the public good, right? So we can't always rely on the open data sets that are available in social media or whatever that's there in the digitized documents. So we have to go look for department-specific data that is owned by governments. So what is the data sharing policies that is existing in India which will enable people to utilize, leverage all the data that is relevant for adopting AI solutions that will make an impact in people's life, right? So all these data sharing policies will have to go through certain process and some approvals from different departments which will take time. That is one of the most challenging thing in India. And people are trying to overcome all these challenges through open sourcing all these data through the AI Coach platforms, where they anonymize certain things, protect certain things, and they get something based on some requests. So they publish certain things saying that, okay, these are the available data, and then you can go request and then access it based on the approvals that you get. Apart from this, the concept of anonymization and the way in which you crowdsource data, right? Those things are the most important things which the developer should be aware of. And crowdsourcing data actually happens only when you build trust between users. So when you want to build trust, there is a main concept of engaging the user community to all through the AI lifecycle, where you start engaging with the community, end user community, right from the design, development, and deployment phase, and ensure that the user needs are met, and also you align with the ethical values and policies of the organization, and that those things are the most important things from the Indian perspective. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Geeta. There's so much we're trying to condense into this. I feel like we immediately need to follow up. But I'm going to just let us finish this round, and we'll try and get back to some of these things. So many questions in your answers. So I'm going to go to Manu. And Manu, I know you've got a lot to say from Karya on, and I think it's very well known to a lot of people in the audience. But I think what we haven't covered, and that I would like you to at least touch on, is the question. I mean, we talk about public value and public interest, and building this so that people can benefit from it. But we seldom speak about that. It's still extractive from communities and that, and the revenue sharing kind of things that you've managed to actually we talk about in theory, but you're actually getting working. Please do share that with us.
Absolutely. One, so happy to follow Geeta, because I think she set up the stage so beautifully with some of the things that we've been trying to do in India. I'm so happy to be here. I'm actually representing my colleague Ashwin, who leads so much of her work, who leads all of her work, not so much, all of her work outside India. My name is Manu. Karya is the Sanskrit word for work that gives you dignity. And we think deeply about how can AI be a force of good for all our communities, right? How do we bring accelerated earning and learning opportunities to low-income communities across the global south? And how do we center our communities? I think Geeta spoke so beautifully about the AI value chain. Right? So from data collection to model building to fine-tuning to evaluations, how do we make sure across every single one of these parts of the AI value chain we're not being extractive? And wherever possible, we are giving our communities the highest wages possible, the highest ownership possible, having agency over their lives and over how technology enters them. Fei Li talks about this beautifully, right? She says that our relationship with technology is fundamentally broken because for all of us in the global south, it is always a foreign object, right? Technology always happens to us instead of happening from us. And the question for this AI moment specifically is, how do we think of our communities not just as passive beneficiaries of AI models we built, but as active builders, active evaluators? That's what we've been able to do in India. We've done over 500,000 evaluations, human evaluations in the last year. The last panel actually was talking about some of the work that our communities have been able to do in doing really complex evaluations, right? Who gets to decide if an AI model is working for a domain, for a people, but the people who actually ask the same questions in that domain, right? And I think that when we started doing evaluations, there's always this patronizing belief in the tech sector that, oh, this is too complicated. No, this work cannot be done by the communities on the ground, right? But it's not, right? Of course, it cannot be surprising to us that we can meaningfully engage our communities to build complex data sets across all, modalities whenever possible. So if we don't open source our data sets, or if they're not owned by our clients, we try really hard to give our workers in principle ownership of their data sets so we can do royalties. We've been able to do not a very meaningful amount of that so far, but we're making a big bet on that this year, which I'm really, really excited about, and thinking deeply about how do we make sure our communities don't just get decent wages, don't just get a say in the revolution, they're centered in it in the most meaningful way possible. And we've been doing this work in India, and last year we expanded to, in 2024, we expanded to Kenya and Ethiopia with the help of incredible partners like Leyu, Bethlehem Desi, who's going to be here, I think, tomorrow from Leyu, and Digital Green, of course, which is based in India and Kenya. And now, thanks to Ashwin, we're expanding to South Africa. So I'm very excited about that. With the help of Lilapa, that is just such an incredible organization. We're so lucky to be able to do that. We're thinking deeply about expanding into Indonesia, into the US, and in every single one of these expansions, I want Karya to be the most silent partner. In that, the engagement should not be called Karya. That's very important to us. And number two, the communities in these countries should own their data sets, should get to benefit from the data sets. And all we want to bring is the platform, is the network, is the learnings that we have had as we have built foundational Indian language data sets that have contributed to things like AI Kosh and Vani and all these things that you will hear about over the next 5 days. And I think I will end with just restoring the ability of all our communities. There's no difference in in the capability between our communities and the people who currently get to decide how AI is built. And I think with that belief, we want to cheesily build a world in which AI works for all of us. I think that's just really important. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Manu. I'm so short of time, I'm going to move immediately to Diana Mosquera from Diversa to just have our Latin American input. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Can you hear me well? Okay. Thank you, Alison, for the invitation. And I would like to be briefly, because we have a few minutes. And I bring with me some reflections from Latin America. And I start with three pillars on the discussions on the governance frameworks, local language models, and the AI development. Because from our experience working from Latin America, we have learned that governance debates cannot be reduced to access and controlled. The core questions is not only who can use data, but who defines what data matters, for what purpose, and under what institutional arrangements. Governance is not merely regulatory or administrative, it is a political topic, because every data set, every classifications, every optimizations decision reflects power relations. And in the global south, these debates unfold and in context shaped that, by extractivism and data colonialism, where value is often generated local but captured elsewhere. And in many countries, and especially in my country and in Ecuador and Latin America, and I think this is happening in the global south, are currently developing national AI strategies. These are important steps, but however, too often these frameworks remain declarative. They articulate ethical principles, but like binding mechanisms, accountability structures, and mindful public participations. Without these operationalizations, principles that not shift power. And the questions that bring with me is who defines which the problems of AI should solve, who sets performance standards, who bears the rights, and who captures the value. And for me, these topics are important because local language modeling is frequently the framework and issues and not only on issues of inclusions, ensuring communities are representing in digital systems. But representations alone is not enough, because language is not just data. Language, it carries culture, memory, and social meaning. And if local language are not treated merely as raw material for model training, and without community participation in how data is curated, interpreted, and used, we risk reproducing extractive dynamics. And in a new form, And true local language AI requires a participatory process. Communities should have a role of defining data collections practice, consent mechanisms, intended use case, and benefit sharing. Otherwise, the inclusion becomes other form or appropriations. And in the end, across these areas, one principle stands out. Local language models are not just technical tools. They shape how our knowledge, culture, and related are represented in the digital systems. And if we want if we want to equitable AI ecosystems, inclusion is not enough. Community must have a real decisions making power over their language, are collected, modeling, and deployment. So the final questions is it's not only how to make AI safer. The question is who has the power to shape our language in these systems. And yeah, that is the reason that our work in Diversa is an organization based in Ecuador. We develop these local language models, small language models, and we use artificial intelligence and data analysis and geographical, spatial data analysis, from this critical, this feminist perspective to find another ways to develop AI. And yeah, this is all I think. Thank you.
Diana, thank you so much for that. I'm going to ask the panelists if they want to ask each other any questions before we go back, because I think they've had so many interesting intersections between their work. But I did just want to also, just before we go to the audience, for just one or two questions, although that clock is not the right time, I must just tell you. No, like the real time, I'm serious. So I just wanted to say, I mean, I think this was really wonderful about what's come together in this panel, is this entire ecosystem of common values and, you know, community access, of public value. So the big model that we were speaking about is the kind of big picture, bringing together, creating, you know, the state creating an enabling environment for the access to data of our public institutions, of our democratic public institutions. I think it's important for us that we've got this model on the African continent because we have one of the most, probably the most democratic constitutions in the world. A lot of this stuff is required by the government to do, and it simply cannot currently kind of keep up with these technological demands. So I think we've got this big picture where we create these opportunities, and then we've got universities like Vukosi Maravati, but also working through organizations like Letlapa that are building community ownership, community agency. So it's not only this big statist kind of model that there, but it's an enabling environment for these different innovations to be able to do all sorts of different things. And I think there are questions about, you know, initially making this a preferential model. It's for local development. Because I think a lot of what's happened in some of these earlier discussions was, you know, big tech coming in and saying, well, we can do this for you. And, you know, we'll take all the data, we'll put make sure that you can have local language and for your government broadcasting and stuff. So it's really important that this is preferentially, you know, this is for access for Africans. And in the context of the African data policy framework, it's also, there's notions of reciprocity, so that on the continent we can actually get the kind of economies of scale and scope that one needs to be competitive and build some of these models, some of these bigger foundational models. So I'm sure that maybe the panel wouldn't mind if we just took some questions from them. Anybody want to before we, otherwise you can meet afterwards and have a discussion. Any questions from the floor? Yeah.
Some very interesting thoughts on access to data. And I had a question around this, which is based on a conversation that I had.
Just introduce yourself.
Yes. So I'm Ashwin. I'm from Karya. I'm from the platform team, and I focus on our work outside of India, especially in Africa and Indonesia and so on. So I was having a conversation with a potential partner in Rwanda, and they were talking about how there are common languages that are present across borders of countries, such as Swahili, Kinyarwanda, Yoruba, and so on. And the African continental free trade policy doesn't specifically talk about data trade between countries. So I was wondering if you're thinking about access to data. There are data sets that are accessible, let's say, in certain countries. How would we sort of speak with the representatives of different countries and sort of negotiate transfer of data across borders, since it's not covered under the ambit of policies like the free trade policy?
I'm going to answer that very quickly because Research ICT Africa supported the African Union Data Policy Framework. And what you're asking for the Continental Free Trade Area, the Data Policy Framework is developed to support the Continental Free Trade Area. It's a towards a single digital market. So all the issues of cross-border transfers within Africa is what the harmonization and the domestication of the African Union data policy framework's about. It's the principles all there. Obviously, the operationalizing of it is different, and different countries are at different levels of implementation. But the principles are completely there, and the importance of that for innovation, but also for business and trade, economic development, are very strongly embedded in the digital transformation strategy, in these things. But the data policy framework is really carved out for this. Governments all signed off on it. All governments signed off on it. So if if it is a problem, then you need to try and get those governments to get the African Union, who was meant to be here. Unfortunately, they're not on the panel. I think you probably saw they were advertisers on the panel, because they're trying to harmonize, they're trying to domesticate this all. And I know there's probably a lot more to be said on that. I'm going to just see if there are a few more questions, and then other people can come back to these questions. No more questions? Yeah, please go ahead. I'm also going to ask you if you wouldn't mind just standing up, because it's actually so loud behind us.
So, hello everyone, I'm Romit. I work with conversational AI agents. We mainly discuss about globally available public data in Global South mainly, and most of it is text-based data or voice-based data. Are we anyways working on making video-based or image-based data to make such AI models available for public use, or any data which we can directly use for now?
Is this in the Indian context, outside of Indian context?
Anywhere.
So we do that in India, right? So of course we collect multimodal data sets. We've just started doing, just 6 months ago, egocentric data collection as we prepare for more work around the spatial intelligence space. We also just helped open source Vani Phase 2, which is one of the largest multimodal data sets in Indian language history, with the help of IISc and of course our partners at Google, and all of that is on AI Kosh. To Geeta's point that you can try out and download. I will give it to the rest of the panel on what is the state of multimodal data collection, but we are more than happy to support it. We're very excited.
Okay. Previously when I spoke, I mentioned about the Masakhane community. So more recently, we have the Masakhane African Languages Hub, which is now an arm out of the Masakhane community that is sub-granted into the African ecosystem. One of our recent calls specifically on multimodal datasets that are culturally grounded in African languages, and we are focusing on the 50 most spoken African languages. So the call went out in the beginning of this year, and it's intended to collect text, image, and audio, mostly related to language. So that is the one thing that both the image, the text, and the audio has to have in common, and it has to be culturally grounded in an African language. So there is that effort, and it's something that we have been focusing on for the last couple of years. And the idea is to not just collect this data, but look at the reality of most of the LLMs we have out there when it comes to how they respond to questions which are culturally grounded in some of our languages. They kind of miss, if for example, you ask the LLMs out there in my tradition, can you tell me a breakfast idea? Probably it will be something more English related. So solving for some of those challenges is what we aim to have with this data set.
Thank you so much. Now we really are out of time, proper time. I'm nevertheless going to just see, because nobody's thrown us out the room quite yet. Does anybody want to make a last comment, or could you just meet informally? If anybody'd like to come up, we can close off the session and let people go. Anything urgent? I'm sure there's lots of stuff, but we'll end anyway. Thank you so much for joining us this late session. I know it was very difficult to get here for many people, especially coming in late from outside. We are going to be hopefully showcasing, once these final negotiations are finished, the concept note for the G20 group is on the DCDT site, and you can look at that. It was very strongly endorsed by a lot of countries, not only global South countries, countries within Europe who were saying We also don't actually have a lot of Danish content. so it really was an issue that was really very strongly supported by everyone. But such lovely insights from you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And we see you during the course of the week. Thank you. And we should have had rehearsal there. Brilliant. Thank you so much. What's the